how it all went south.
Okay, Sean, so the day is March 9th, 1996, and Paul Templar is on the Zambezi River in Zimbabwe. Now, he's there because he's a registered river guide, and he is in a canoe leading a tour group down the river. And each of the canoes carries two tourists and a paddler. So kind of your expert paddler to take you around. And it is located not far from the amazing, gorgeous Victoria Falls. So you can imagine just how incredible a scene it is. And I read a Knight Ridder piece on this where Paul is quoted saying, "We were coming down the river, turned around a corner, and I saw a hippo with a calf. So I decided to avoid that."
Smart move, I think.
Yes. So he was pretty wise to what was happening on this river and having to take tour groups and seeing wildlife, of course, including hippos, which, you think they're harmless, they're cute, there's all those things, but there's a danger there. And so he took an alternate route. But what Templar knew that the others didn't was that there was a rogue male hippo that would hang out down by the river, and he was usually further down the river, but not today.
Gotta watch out for those rogue hippos.
Rogue,
And by the way, there's never a time where I've thought about a hippo and thought the word's harmless. Those two have never been. The thing weighs like 3,000 pounds. I've never thought, look at that cute little hippo.
But they are cute. The little celebrity memed up hippo is the cutest thing in the world.
Yeah, you've seen a real hippo, right?
Yeah, of course.
They're really cool, but they are probably far from cute.
And that's what today's episode is about. So, the hippo came up and went after the third canoe in the back. And one of the paddlers, his name was Evan Nemasango, was in that canoe and was knocked into the water by this male hippo. And so Templar, being the tour guide and the guy that's leading, and with all his experience and smarts, paddled back to try and rescue Evan. And this is where it gets really crazy. So Templar said, quote, "I bent over to grab a hold of him. The hippo came up between the two of us and took me out of the canoe. I went straight down his throat. It smelled like death. It was pretty dark." So Paul Templar, he got swallowed by a hippo.
Wow. Think about that.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, that's got to be a big hippo, even for a hippo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stuff about, hippos, rhinos. And hippos are such good swimmers, which, just being this big giant animal you don't think about, but they're really agile in the water. So it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's like fighting a shark, you know what I mean? But they're in their element. You're
it's like
not.
or like a grizzly bear, like in The Revenant, right? Like it's just like full on attack by the claws. And in this case, the piercing tusks or teeth. And the strength of and size of these animals they're just massive.
Not to mention pooping your pants with fear. I can only imagine.
I can only imagine. So let me tell you what actually happened. So the hippo has got him in his mouth. He starts thrashing Templar's body, letting him go, and then doing it all over again. In a crazy way. And kind of the reaction was like, this is not really how they're supposed to behave. They're not this kind of, I think that's maybe why the term rogue hippo came up later on. This hippo maybe was protecting the calf. I don't really know, but like he was on a mission for sure. So the injuries to Templar's body were horrific and included the tusks going through Templar's chest under his left armpit. So he's got holes in his back and his lungs, right? The bite severed, so this is crazy. It severed, but ended up sealing a chest artery, which prevented him from bleeding out. So
wow, that's
by luck, it kind of, it's terrible, of course, but it actually sealed up an artery. Otherwise, he would have died instantly, right? Bit through his lungs and just missed his heart and kidneys. And he was bitten a total of 38 times.
Oh my god. I don't wanna say lucky. I was gonna say that, like, I don't wanna say lucky that it sealed up the but yeah, you're lucky that that happened, but, being bitten by a hippo 38 times, and I can't even imagine going through that, but I can't imagine what your life is like after that in the
Y
recovery.
yeah, and remember, he's trying to save this other guy, Evan. He's got his hands on him, and he had to let go after that first hippo attack. Um, he had let go, and, as Templar describes it to Knight Ridder in that article, that is the last time we saw the paddler, and so Evan died as part of that attack. So he was the first one that we, kind of from behind of this group, the hippo came, and he died, he drowned, and obviously there was other injuries, but, Templar had he had his hands on him, and because he was going through his own trauma, he had to let him
Sure.
go.
Well, I wouldn't even think it was had to let him go. I'm thinking it was had no choice, and it was just kinda ripped out of his hands, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly. But miraculously, as you would imagine, Templar survived. Even after being plunged down into the hippo's mouth, being pierced with these, massive 20-inch tusks or teeth. Um, and this is wild. So when the hippo attacked a third time, Templar had a 357 Magnum on him and tried to fire at the hippo while it's coming for him, but the hippo got there first before he could fire, biting through his pants and his underwear. And so he like scoots back. He gets on these shallow rocks near the shores, and the hippo doesn't come up there. So he's alive, but it's bad. And he couldn't get that gun fired in time while it was. You can see that. You can picture that in your mind, right?
yeah, yeah. Jesus. Well, I mean, that's just what a horrible experience to live through. I mean, thankfully, you lived through it, but I can't even imagine, and what a story to tell your grandkids if you have them.
Well, and in some ways it gets worse before it gets better. So, what happened to Paul Templar? So remember, he's in the middle of the jungle, right? Hanging on for his life. And so rigor mortis is starting to set in on his arm. His lungs are in bad shape and he needs help badly and he needs it now. And so fast forward to 12 years after this incident, that happened in 1996. We're 2008, and he sits down for an interview with the Detroit Free Press. He's moved to Michigan, and so a local reporter sits down with him, and he discusses his story. He's alive and well, doing great in Michigan, but he went through a lot of trauma, and so um, he actually said something that was really interesting that I didn't really ever think about that you sort of were touching on, which is, do you know that hippos kill more people each year in Africa than any other animal?
I think I did hear that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think I did because they're pretty aggressive at
yeah.
times,
I would
right?
think it would be like a snake or something like
Yeah.
that. But no, hippos. It's kind of like when you're on your trail walk or something, and a grizzly bear comes in, like you're cooked.
Well, yeah, and if a grizzly, there are like things that you're supposed to do. If a black bear attacks you, you make yourself as big and loud as
Right,
possible
right.
and kind of fight it. If a grizzly does that, you play dead. And
Yeah.
I don't know if there's something like that with hippos or if they're just
I
so
don't think there is.
like
It's like punching a shark in the face that's trying to bite you. I don't think there's any kind of like, what do you do for hippos guide if when hippos attack, right?
yeah, and just because of the size and power of those things too, I mean, I would think part of the reason why they're sort of that leading cause of death is that, if you get bitten by a snake, you at least have some time to,
Hmm.
get some antivenom or
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But with a hippo, it's kinda like you're lucky to survive that initial attack to even have an opportunity to
Yeah.
go to the hospital and survive it. So
And
I
you're
that's
probably in a remote area. You're
right,
probably
yeah.
not in the best like he was, right?
Yeah, you're not getting attacked by a hippo, walking your car in the parking deck. You know,
Yeah,
most likely.
so now, here we are 12 years later in 2008, and I got a more detailed list of some of the injuries he suffered, like what I described earlier was he was in the mouth, he was being bitten 38 times, he got that puncture, um, but he describes a lot of the other things that happened. So his foot was crushed, absolutely crushed. He said one of the 20-inch tusks had gone through his foot. Can you imagine the pain?
I can't, and even just what it takes for that to happen. I mean, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Head, neck, and spine injuries, as you would imagine, the thrashing around and, like the trauma of being shaken, if you will, by this massive ton or, 1 or 2 ton animal. The punctured lung, which I described. And he said both arms were, quote, barely attached. One of them, he said, was, quote, just torn and broken and crushed. Yeah. So let's go back to that day in 1996. And remember, he's in the middle of nowhere and all this happened. And it took 8 hours to get him to the hospital. And he didn't have any painkillers. He's got this punctured lung,
And you're
right?
in I mean, you're in shock, obviously, at that point, so, you know, at least for some of that time, because I mean, the amount of shock you'd be in, the level of shock that you would be in after that.
And this is
I
wild. He's got the punctured lung, and that's a huge worry. His lung is going to collapse. So they had snacks along for the tour, and they had Saran wrap. So they actually put Saran wrap over his lung to keep it from collapsing.
Wow.
Can you imagine that?
No.
Um, and they cut up shirts to stop the bleeding and all that stuff. But he did make it to the hospital, and he did end up losing one of his arms. And so he just has the one arm. It was close to maybe losing his legs and his other arms, but he was able to pull through there.
His other arms?
His other arm, yeah. Sorry.
What about his foot, though? Because
I,
he said his foot was crushed, and normally if it's crushed to a certain level, there's nothing they could do. They kept his
I don't
foot?
know. I don't think he lost his foot or any part of his leg, especially that damaged one, but I'm sure it's not great,
Right,
So
yeah.
he there was a huge replacement cost to get a prosthetic arm, and he raised money to be able to do so, and he has that now. And this is an interesting quote from that article where he says, the doctor said to him words that still are hauntingly sticking with him to this day. He said, Paul, always remember, you are the sum of your choices. You're exactly who, what, and where you choose to be in life. And I think what he meant was, listen, this has been devastating. You've been in a lot of pain. This is not easy. But just remember you're here, and what you make of your life now is essentially what your life is going to be. And so even through all that trauma, I thought it was really cool that he pulled through. But I think the first couple years he thought about that quote a lot, and kind of it was depressing for him still,
Yeah,
you
because
know?
you hear this a lot with people who've been through really traumatic and horrible accidents and life-altering accidents. You have sort of a choice. If you live through it, you have a choice to make, and it's
Yeah.
wallow in it and be
Yeah.
depressed and sorry that your life is not what it was and it's different, or you use that to, that experience to whatever, to help other people or,
Yeah.
make something different and new out of your life that's positive. And I can't imagine that's an easy choice to make. We all like to say we can live through these things and we're tough and we're strong and what, but I think if you're in the situation, it becomes a whole different ball
Yeah,
game.
and this is not to this level, but my grandfather on my mom's side, he was World War II veteran, and he came back from the war, and he got polio. He was gainfully employed, and then he got polio, and I never saw him without he couldn't use his right hand, and he had to stop working. And so my grandmother worked at a, doctor's office. She was the breadwinner. It was really hard for a man post World War II that had seen, had been in the war and came back a hero and did not be employed at that time, and also just like couldn't always take care of himself. That's a hard thing, and he really struggled with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the time period. I mean, you're talking, this is
Yep.
before really the women's rights movement, and it was just so expected of a man to be the provider and the woman was the housewife, and that was it
And they have
most of the
3 kids,
times.
including
Yeah.
my mom is one of them. So it's a big deal. And just kind of reflecting back on Paul today, He's a keynote speaker, and I just think that is cool. He's offering inspiring words to people from throughout the world of what he's gone through and his story of survival. And I pulled up a video from his website, and he was actually quoting the doctor's story to this day in that video. He still is word for word remembering at the top of his head those words that the doctor had said to him that day. Still stick with him, and he brought it up in that video. So, um, is I mean, it's tragic in some ways, but also inspirational in another that that Paul Templar survived this crazy hippo attack where he was literally, like he said, like, I'm in the hippo's mouth in the middle of the jungle, and he survived.
It reminds me of, have you seen the video that went around online a couple months back, maybe 6 months ago? And it was, someone filming their family member on kayaks, and
No.
a whale comes up underneath the kayak, it's all on
Yes.
video, and
Yeah.
completely swallows and goes underwater with this I mean, and then a minute later, the kayak shoots up because it spit him out. I mean, it's, there's zero, it's just fight or flight reaction in a situation like that. I have to think with the hippo, it's the same thing. Like, your adrenaline cuts off all reasoning, and I would think fear for a minute, and you're just
Yeah.
react. But I cannot imagine what that would be like. And hopefully never will know.
Yeah, and I've been on, boats fishing before, and they're like, "Don't get tangled in your line," and this is like marlin fishing. If you get a marlin on the line and you could get pulled out of the boat on the line and never be seen again if that marlin can take you because 'cause they're that big.
Oh, I believe it. Yeah. Yeah, it's a strong fish.
So
Um,
this is, the initiation of my first, animal attack story. There will be more. I found more, and those will come back in the future, but I thought that this was just, like, a wild story, and maybe folks have heard of this before. I had not, and, yeah, it's wild.
yeah. Um, Mental note, stay away from hippos. Respect hippos.
That's right. Okay, well,
Yeah.
we'll be back, after the break.